Hello and welcome to Vero Stories. In this video I will tell you about the cozy horror story The Midnight Library. The rain had been coming down steadily for hours, a soft drumming against the windows that felt like the world was wrapped in a comforting blanket of sound. Inside, the fire crackled with a gentle warmth, the flames curling up from the hearth as they flickered and danced. It was the kind of night that invited you to curl up with a good book, a cup of tea, and let time slip away. Harper had always been fond of nights like this. The quiet of the world had a calming effect on her, filling her with a deep sense of tranquility. She had moved to the small town of Marlow a few months ago, seeking a quiet place to write. A writer's life had its challenges, especially when you craved solitude. Marlow was just the sort of sleepy town she'd been looking for, with its cobbled streets, ivy-clad cottages, and that slight sense of something forgotten. The kind of place where you could blend in unnoticed if you wanted to, or, perhaps, where the town itself would absorb you, like an old forgotten book, waiting for someone to open it and remember the story. Harper had found an old cottage on the edge of town, nestled between towering pines and a path that led into the woods. The cozy cottage featured a stone chimney, its sides adorned with ivy that slowly climbed upwards. The inside was cozy and comfortable, with dark wood floors and shelves of old books that smelled faintly of dust and adventure. The air always felt a little colder here, but she didn't mind. It added to the atmosphere, a constant reminder that she was living in a world that had its own rhythm, its own pace. Tonight, as the storm raged outside, Harper sat at her writing desk, pen in hand, staring out of the window. The wind shrieked outside, carrying a biting cold into the room, yet the fire's warmth held it back. She wasn't writing, however. She hadn't written anything in days, and it was beginning to frustrate her. Ideas came in flashes, but none of them seemed to stick. She'd been thinking about the town lately, about the strange things people whispered when they thought no one was listening. Marlow was a quiet town, but there were stories, a history, buried in the dark corners of the streets and the walls of its old buildings. She'd heard about the Midnight Library. The locals were tight-lipped about it, but Harper had managed to pry bits of information from the few people who were willing to talk. They said it was a place that didn't exist during the day. But come midnight, when the moon was high and the air thick with secrets, the library would appear. It wasn't on any map, nor could it be found by any ordinary means. People who stumbled across it often didn't even realize they'd been there until it was too late. They would walk into the library's doors as if they had always been there, but the books they found inside were not books anyone had ever seen before. Harper was intrigued, of course. A secret library? A place where stories lived that no one knew about. She couldn't resist the pull of it. She had to see it for herself. And tonight, she thought, might be the night. The clock on the mantel struck 11, the sound echoing through the room like a bell tolling in a distant chapel. Harper stood up from her desk, stretching her arms over her head. She had already decided that if she couldn't write, she would go for a walk. She could see the glow of the town's lights in the distance, a soft amber halo through the rain. Pulling on her coat and boots, Harper stepped out into the storm. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and pine. The wind tugged at her hair as she made her way down the cobblestone street, the glow of street lamps flickering weakly in the downpour. She followed the path she had walked so many times before, winding her way toward the center of town. The Midnight Library was said to be near the old church, on a street that wasn't marked. She had never taken the path during the night, but tonight felt different, as if the town itself was beckoning her forward. The clock tower struck midnight as she reached the churchyard, the sound of the bells reverberating in her chest. Harper glanced around, her eyes scanning the shadowed alleys and old, weathered buildings. There was something alive about the night. A quiet energy that made her heart race with anticipation. As she stepped into the narrow, ivy-covered alley behind the church, she felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. That was when she saw it. At the end of the alley stood a wooden door, weathered and worn, its surface covered in moss and ivy. It was almost impossible to see in the rain, hidden as it was in the shadow of the church. Harper hesitated for a moment, the pull of the door growing stronger with each passing second. She couldn't see a sign, a name, or anything that marked it as the library, but she knew it had to be. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. It creaked on its hinges, and as she stepped inside, a strange warmth washed over her. The air smelled different here, drier, richer, almost like ancient paper and ink. The room was dimly lit by candles that flickered in sconces along the walls. Shelves, tall and heavy with books, lined the space, stretching up to the high ceiling. The soft rustle of pages echoed in the silence. Harper's heart pounded in her chest. She had found it. The Midnight Library. The books were unlike any she had ever seen before. Their spines were not labeled with titles or authors. Instead, they seemed to shimmer in the candlelight, changing and shifting with each movement. Harper reached out for one, her fingers brushing the cover, and a chill ran down her spine. The book practically hummed with energy, a vibration she could feel deep within her bones. She opened it, and her eyes widened. The pages were blank but not entirely blank though. There were faint markings on the edges of each page, symbols she couldn't decipher, but they seemed to pulse with a strange rhythm, as though they were alive, waiting for something. She turned the pages slowly, mesmerized, until something caught her eye. The words began to form on the page, as if the book was writing itself before her very eyes. The ink was dark, almost black, and the letters twisted into shapes she recognized. Harper. Her heart skipped a beat. This book was writing about her. Before she could react, a voice broke the silence. "You found it." Harper spun around, her hand gripping the book tightly. A figure stood in the shadows, just out of the reach of the candlelight. The figure was tall and thin, dressed in a long, flowing robe of midnight blue, its edges shimmering with silver threads. "I'm sorry," Harper whispered, her voice shaking. "Who are you?" The figure took a step forward, its movement smooth and fluid, like the whisper of wind through trees. "I am the keeper of the library," it said, its voice calm, but carrying an edge of something ancient, something otherworldly. "And you, Harper, are the newest guest." The keeper's words hung in the air for a moment, and Harper felt a strange sense of unease creep over her. "Guest?" she repeated. "I don't understand. What is this place?" The keeper smiled, though it wasn't a smile that felt warm. It was distant, unknowing. "This is a place for stories, stories that haven't been told, stories that are waiting. But every story comes with a price." Harper's grip on the book tightened. She didn't like the sound of that. A price? What kind of price? The keeper's eyes glimmered in the dark. "A story of your own. Everyone who comes here leaves with one." Harper swallowed hard. She wasn't sure if she understood, but she knew that she wasn't going to leave until she did. Slowly, cautiously, she asked, "What happens if I don't want to leave with a story?" The keeper's gaze deepened, and for the first time, Harper felt a true sense of dread. "Then the story will find you." Before she could respond, the keeper faded into the shadows, leaving Harper standing alone in the midst of the books. The pages of the book she held in her hands were still turning, the ink still swirling into shape. She had come here for answers, but now, she felt she had only opened the door to more questions. But one thing was certain, the Midnight Library always took something from you. And tonight, Harper was going to find out what that would be.